Climate change has been revealed as a class war that is being waged by the rich against the poor. Something insane is going on inside the Bella Center, where somehow solving the problems of climate change means rewarding with special new business ventures the very companies that are responsible for the climate crisis, giving them new carbon markets, allowing them to enclose the final uncolonized spaces.
Since the Kyoto Protocol came into force, emissions have been rising and the rate of increase has been rising. The COP really creates a shield around the global capitalist system, the economic and the political system, because it essentially legitimizes what goes on by pretending that the problems are being solved. But since we know the problems are being solved, the COP legitimizes our fucked up business as usual.
10 years down the line from Seattle, we have the same forces that brought us the WTO trying to now invade into the environmental treaties to expand the commodification of the last forest on Earth, the taking over of the last patch of land on Earth. And they've gone so arrogant, they don't realize, they don't look back and say, we were stopped in Seattle, we were stopped in Cancun, we were stopped in Hong Kong. Doha hasn't moved since 2001. Something is seriously wrong with the way we are making decisions, and people are not listening anymore.
You're sort of in two minds thinking, well, maybe it's better for the whole thing to fold and people just, you know, nations and people just to go their own way and do what is right.
I'm 9 years old, I'm 10 tomorrow, and I'm in year 5.
Is it your birthday in Copenhagen?
Yeah.
Okay.
My worries are that big corporations are going to get in there and make demands on governments, and the governments are going to give way to the corporations rather than listening to the people.
Our opinion was that it was absolutely necessary to organize grassroots mobilization on the question of climate change, and we saw that the big environmental NGOs don't do that. We're proud of the presence of unionists in the train because this is exactly the kind of things we want to do to mobilize grassroots militant activists in the unions to join the social struggle and the environmental struggle.
Once you change your philosophy, you change your thought pattern. Once you change your thought pattern, you change your attitude. Once you change your attitude, it changes your behavior pattern. And then you go on into some action.
It is so wonderful to be in the liberated zone of Christiana after the colonized zone of the Bella Center today. I make no apologies for being in Copenhagen these 2 weeks. This matters. We're building something powerful. We are taking our movement and our analysis to a whole new stage. I think the air is electric. It is electric. And
the COP really isn't about solving the climate crisis. The COP is fundamentally about solving the multiple crises that global capitalism had got itself into in the last few years. Put it another way, the COP isn't about saving us, the COP is about saving global capitalism.
There's this arrogance that says the signatories of the UN framework on climate change don't count, third world countries don't count, hundreds of thousands of people from the ecological movement, farmers' movements, indigenous movements, women's movements who've gathered here, they don't count. 5 countries will gang up, bring out a Danish draft. Obama will talk to the Chinese premier and talk to someone else and bring out a dismantling agenda for the UN framework on climate change. This is arrogant power at its highest. And these are symptoms of this kind of power just before it collapses.
It's one big boat, you know what's taking a bath. One big boat, you know what's taking a bath. They want to privatize the air.
Business is going to take over the world. We just realize that what we're doing here as a social movement, as a social environmental justice movement, climate justice movement, is that we're here to say, you're not fucking taking it all off.
The idea of emissions trading is reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by a given amount in the place where it's cheapest, and that given amount is the so-called cap. So you've got a factory which pollutes, you've got another factory somewhere else, an aeroplane, some agriculture, and a bus. So you've got all these different things which are polluting. So the idea is, let's give everyone permits to emit CO2. And so we've got permission for 3 million tonnes here, 3 million tonnes here. We could say, okay, aviation gets so many million tonnes, agriculture gets so many million tonnes, and so on. And so you get a total number of permissions, and that gives you the cap, because it all goes up into the atmosphere, and it all mingles in the atmosphere. Well, it kind of doesn't really matter where the cuts come from. They could come from this factory, or they could come from aviation. They could come from Great Britain, or they could come from China. It might be that it's easier for this factory to cut down its emissions than this one. Or it might be easier for this factory to do it than aviation to do it. If it turns out that this factory could make cuts in its emissions quite easily, maybe it can do what it was doing before and emit only 2 million tonnes. So it's got this permission to emit 1 million tonnes, and it can sell it. Maybe this factory is really dirty for some reason and it needs to emit 4 million tonnes. So this factory can give this factory permission to emit another 1 million tonnes. So money will go from this factory to this factory, and therefore we get cap and trade. This could happen between 2 factories in the same sector, between different sectors of industry, and it can happen from one country to another. Over time, the cap is supposed to fall, so the number of permits is supposed to be reduced year on year. And then they're traded, and you allow the market to say, well, okay, it's more efficient to make cuts in this sector or in this country than in this one, and therefore the cuts are made in the most efficient way. So it's the cheapest, the most efficient, the best way of reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But in practice, they've been given out to free, and they've been allocated on the basis of past emissions. So it turns out that big polluters get more permits.
Corporation switchboards were jammed. They're gonna privatize the air. Suck it in like a billionaire.
Parts of Eastern Europe, industry collapsed, so they had enormous surplus of permits simply because of economic crisis, which then, of course, they solved. So for many polluting industries, selling permissions to pollute has become an important revenue stream for them.
There was an estimate by Point Carbon, who are carbon market analysts from the industry, who said that between 2008 and 2012, this could get Europe's major power companies somewhere between 20 and 70 billion worth of windfall profits.
By 2015 or 2020, these markets are going to be about $2 to $3 trillion large. Now, I want to get into a lot of political economy, but one of the current crises of capitalism is a crisis of overaccumulation. That means there isn't enough places to profitably invest your money. That then leads to financialization, to all these kind of speculative bubbles. So the important point is that the main effect of the COP has been to create new markets, to create new opportunities for profit.
The other thing that's happened is that rights to emit carbon dioxide have become bankable. You can hold on to them over time. So if you don't emit the pollution that you kind of have a right to in such and such a year, you can do it in the next year or the year after. And so if you have a recession, as we have at the moment, the price of these permits plummets, then financial speculators who don't care what they're buying or selling, they're just interested in their rate of return, you could have them coming into the market and buying up pollution permits now because carbon is cheap, in the expectation that once the economy gets going again, then the price of carbon will rise and they'll be able to make a profit. The other aspect of carbon trading is the so-called carbon offset. If a factory, say in Great Britain, is required to make a reduction in its emissions, the other thing it could do is say, well, we could buy some offsets. We could find some project, and these projects have to be in developing countries, so in Eastern Europe, and they're saying, we would have built a coal-fired power station, but we haven't, we've built a nuclear power station, therefore we're due some offsets. Those offsets can be purchased by a coal-fired power station in Western Europe, or in some tropical region. We would have cut down this rainforest, but we haven't, and therefore that counts as a reduction. Certainly building a nuclear power station, we could argue, is enormously risky. And in fact, many of these projects where they're not cutting down rainforest, what's involved is governments in these countries are enclosing that rainforest, and they're clearing out indigenous people who lived there, people who lived on that land for generations sustainably, in order to set up some national park or whatever.
In the Niger Delta, there's a lot of controversy around oil extraction and around gas flaring. Gas flaring is illegal in Nigeria, although Shell and other companies still do. But now they said, okay, well, we know it's illegal, but we're still doing it. So how about we make a new carbon trading project that we will reduce the flaring of our gas, and then from that we will generate credits. So in fact, they're getting credits for doing something that was illegal anyway.
How much longer are you gonna wear this? It's a con. Let's privatize the air.
Joseph Stiglitz, who was a former World Bank economist. You've got Jeffrey Sachs, who instituted shock therapy in Bolivia, Poland and Russia, questioning neoliberalism. Nicholas Stern, the lead author of the report on climate change, has described climate change as the biggest market failure in history. And yet, what is the solution to market failure? More markets.
This emphasis on carbon is really a distraction from having a holistic understanding of nature, of ecology, of possible ecosystem collapse, and it really distracts us from really challenging what industrial capitalism has developed and brought forward to us.
The modeling was largely started by atmospheric physicists, James Hansen and people like that. And they look at the air. From the air, they realize the burning of fossil fuels is what is causing all of the climate problem. So from there, they've moved to all other energy sources, and they were stuck with energy. So they were stuck with the air, and then they were stuck with energy. We are now reaching the level where we are finding out what happens on the ground decides what happens in the air.